Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name's Michael Eshu, and I'm a senior manager at AWS, and I focus on customer onboarding and adoption for AWS Managed Services. And I'm joined today by Dave and Julia. Dave, please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dave Bartoletti, VP and Principal Analyst at Forrester Research.
Hi, and I'm Julia Fadeyeva, TI consultant at Forrester Research.
Thanks so much for joining us today, Dave and Julia. So first of all, we'll take you through the agenda of what we want to cover today. Dave is going to take us through the state of cloud migration and modernization and how Forrester has been working with customers and watching customers move through that journey. And then Julia is going to go into a deeper discussion about the Forrester Total Economic Impact, or TEI, framework, and the objective to identify all of the factors that affect an investment decision for migration. She'll share some of the analysis and financial summarization she's done from the Forrester TEI study that AWS commissioned regarding the return on investment of AWS customers investing in AWS Managed Services. I will then respond to questions from the audience, so we look forward to that. You'll be able to do that via the chat box and instructions provided as we go through this. But first, we'll start with an overview of what AWS Managed Services is and how AWS has been approaching modernizing IT. So you can see from this diagram, we think about a flywheel of modernization. We firmly believe success in modernization is tied to iteration. And this transformation flywheel that captures the learnings, content, and capabilities and build on them with each iteration. The idea is simple, and it combines the concept of iterations versus big bets, and two, focusing on differentiating elements while leveraging non-differentiating capabilities and assets that are readily available. And lastly, three, experiential learning and building. We learn by doing. And so this flywheel is about iterating at an increasing pace and capturing the learnings and content to help accelerate the outputs and impact from each turn of the flywheel. Let me explain. So we'll start with the outcome that we're all looking for when we begin a transformation project. We want to get production applications operating in the cloud, not just migrating. The goal isn't to migrate data or production or non-production applications over, but actually productionalize our migrated applications. We want the operating model that we use to be safe, secure, and available and put us in a position to modernize. So we start with that migration phase, right? Building out the necessary migration factory that we're going to use to start building migrating applications over. And that leads us to optimizing the deployment patterns and building the automations to operate effectively, both from a cost and availability and a reliability standpoint. And these also provide a tremendous amount of learning opportunities. It can fund the next steps and savings alone. With auto-scaling groups, automations, building confidence with the team, think about creating this migration factory that'll leverage patterns and reusable automation to drive scale. And as you go through that, you'll begin to see modernization patterns emerge where you can take advantage of higher order AWS services, further reducing the operating burden and quite likely cost burden of operating these applications. And from those learnings and experience, it's going to lead your team to innovating and starting to be able to give back to the business in the form of innovative application designs, innovative customer experiences, and so on. But in order to do this, you need to build on a solid foundation that AWS Managed Services can provide for you, looking after the undifferentiated heavy lifting but operationally essential tasks of having that foundation of a secure, compliant landing zone. And then again, building on those migration topics that we were discussing from a migration factory perspective, leading to the cloud native services that you'll begin to consume, and ultimately resulting in new application ideas able to run on this operating model that you've already migrated into and the team have already gained learnings on. Again, more optimized to focus on the business versus the undifferentiated tasks of operating your landing zone or your migration factory. And so AMS is able to help you do this, leveraging a couple key components in our operating model. Customers will buy AWS Managed Services, or AMS for short, and it comes out of the box with a prescriptive guided architecture with a defined business outcome of compliant, secure, and scalable results. Again, out of the box, this architecture has PCI DSS in place. You have an attestation in AWS Artifact along with our offer. We have 4 different ISO audits completed: ISO 9000, 27001, 27017, and 18. We're a HIPAA eligible service. We recently achieved our FedRAMP certification from the JAB, and we do a lot of the foundational heavy lifting and then layer on a robust operational framework so that the customer has a secure and scalable starting point and can begin spinning that flywheel. In true AWS fashion, we're fueled by automation. Everything we've done with the service to date has been focused on moving the important but undifferentiated tasks away from human hands to automation. This way, cloud experts can focus on the higher level tasks that matter to the business. And speaking of cloud experts, we give our customers access to the same cloud expertise that we use to build our service when they're using AMS. We also offer ongoing cost optimization, which is often new to customers who are migrating to the cloud quickly. We continuously and consistently work with the customer to identify ways to optimize the environment and the operating model to ensure customer investments are fine-tuned to what they actually need to consume. Think about right-sizing EC2 or our virtual machine instances so that the deployed infrastructure matches what the workload needs to run efficiently versus over-provisioning capacity, wasting valuable compute resources that the application doesn't need. And this could be just leveraging auto-scaling or moving your SQL server off of compute instances and leveraging higher order AWS managed service, such as our relational database service offering. And it can also include strategies for leveraging reserved incidents to further reduce your cost for workloads that you know you'll be running with for 3 or 5 or 1 year periods. We have no vendor lock-in, and that refers to the fact that with the exception of our endpoint protection services, we've built our platform leveraging readily available AWS services. So think of tools like CloudWatch and CloudTrail for log aggregation or Trusted Advisor for cost optimization recommendations. All of these tools are available to non-AMS customers in standard AWS environments. We've started from these same ingredients. And finally, contractually, AMS is a month-to-month consumption-based service. It just mirrors what AWS bills. And we've done the same for managed services as what has been done from the utility compute model. We want customers to have the same flexibility within their managed environments as they do with the AWS utility compute model. We want customers to scale up and scale down depending on their usage patterns inherent within their business and align to their migration, modernization, and transformation strategy. We also want them to use our service for as long as they want to use it and not be held to an arbitrary contract term. This allows customers to use AMS to support migrations or to manage legacy environments that may not be modernized. Again, at the customer's discretion, they can use AMS where it makes sense for them and then move off when that also makes sense. And this now takes us to the key 8 capabilities that AMS has, and you can see our additional operational competencies along the bottom of the slide. But first and foremost, we need to start with provisioning and onboarding workloads to AMS, where we go through tooling standardization so AMS can leverage the automation that we've built at scale. And once we've done that, we've fully integrate our security and compliance tool chain and process set, backed by our team of security humans that can assist with analyzing IAM policy deployments, assisting in mapping our security controls to customer-provided control frameworks, and so on. And once that's in place, we can get to the business of operations, which includes monitoring and alerting, whether that's for a disk space volume full to anomalies detected by AWS guard duty if we see traffic egressing to suspicious endpoints. We can leverage that logging, aggregation, and those other AWS tools for insights for cost optimization and insights about operational health of the environment. Should we be adding capacity, removing capacity, tuning auto-scaling groups? changing the security configuration of AWS security groups, and so on. And then we deploy out our patch and backup services. I think anybody that works in the IT operations space is deeply familiar with how challenging patch can be orchestrated across multiple environment stages, from dev to test through pre-production and production systems. And then certainly backup and business continuity processes, assisting with DR drills and routines, recovery exercises. We do all of this by wrapping the AMS environment or the AWS environment in our change management system that allows us to broker access management and change to the environment between the application operations staff and our infrastructure operations service. And we'll also assist with incident management. If it's infrastructure incident management, we'll offer resolution SLAs to incidents with the infrastructure and assist customers as they work through their application incident management processes, supporting from an incident management perspective, say for network latency concerns and so on that may be impacting application performance. And ultimately, we support service integration to ITSM systems or other third-party products that you might use to govern both your cloud or hybrid cloud estate. And again, we do all these with audited processes through third-party auditors, resulting in PCI attestations and our various compliance frameworks that you see across the bottom, from HITRUST to HIPAA to FedRAMP, to SOC reports levels 1, 2, and 3, and so on. And that rides right along with the AWS compliance attestations as well. So hopefully that very short overview of what AWS Managed Services does is useful as you begin to think about the impact that AMS is able to assist with from an economic perspective. And so we thought it'd be interesting to start with Dave giving you an overview of how Forrester is thinking about cloud modernization and migration. So Dave, let us know the perspective you're coming from.
Thanks so much, Mike. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Dave Bartoletti. As I said, I'm a Vice President and Principal Analyst on Forrester's Infrastructure and Operations team, and I'm our lead analyst on public cloud platforms. I'll be joined later by my colleague Julia to take you through the details. But I first wanted to share with you the state of cloud migration and modernization from a set of ongoing research streams that Forrester's conducting across our client base. My research focus for the last 18 months has been along three paths. First, the evolution and maturation of public cloud platforms overall as a target destination for more and more core enterprise workloads. The second is the development of cloud native platforms to modernize applications, often starting in public cloud, but modernizing applications across platforms. And also a third stream of research specifically called modernizing the core, where Forrester is helping our clients build the strategies to modernize core business applications. And we think that's going to drive a lot of cloud spending for the next 18 months to 5 years. What customers are really doing today is laying down their transformation platforms for the next 10 years. The last 10 to 15 years of evolution in cloud platforms has brought us to a state where there is an amazing collection of development services, infrastructure services, development platforms, and especially now, as you're hearing on this webinar, services to help companies move applications as quickly as possible to get that flywheel started. That today, customers are now saying the time is right. The big picture is that the fastest digital businesses that we work with are focusing on creating connected cloud ecosystems that put their customers at the center. What do I mean by that? It's no longer public cloud versus my data center. It's no longer my data center versus my hosted private cloud. It is all of these platforms are tools that I can use to transform my business, and especially to start rethinking my application architectures so I can bring as much of my systems in the cloud as close to customers and other native cloud services as I can. And a lot of this is mirroring the same thing that's happening at the application level as we chop up monolithic applications into microservices, which we can much more easily deploy to multiple platforms and modernize incrementally, but also what companies are doing with business process. We need to also think about chopping up our business processes to match how we're chopping up our applications. The more nimble we can get And the earlier we can include customers, partners, and suppliers in all of our product development efforts, the more customer-driven we'll be, the better customer experience we'll have, and the more agile our business is in general. So public cloud platforms are a huge catalyst for helping companies create this new connected economy because cloud brings them closer to customers and services. So why transform now? We hear about this a lot, and we focused on this in our research to make sure we could understand the question. Clients have been kicking traditional core business application modernization down the road for 15, 20 years. Why now? What's new about the cloud era that we think makes it much more attractive for companies to innovate around core business applications and especially fund these transformations today? Well, first, it's obvious there's never been as many competitive threats. Your competitors are using public cloud to transform their businesses. It's clear across industries. You need to attract your next technical leaders. And fundamentally, deepening skill with higher value services available in public cloud platforms is what's going to make your company attractive. There are companies that today that are advertising themselves as technology companies from every industry, whether it's healthcare or financial services or manufacturing companies. And in order to advertise yourself as a technology company, maybe not tied to a particular set of vertical applications, you need to build the expertise and you need to get moving in accelerating your adoption of cloud platforms to show your next technical leaders that you're making a commitment to modernization, and especially a commitment to doing it with public cloud. It's also a good way to break the innovation crisis. And in fact, I want to echo some of the things that Mike said. Migration is incredibly significant part of any modernization activity. And we're beyond just looking at modernization as simple lift and shift. Your migration should include searching for opportunities to operate applications better, throw off some operations costs that you shouldn't be, your staff shouldn't be responsible for anymore, but also throw off infrastructure costs and license costs for new modern cloud services that can help you sort of break this innovation crisis, because innovation is difficult to fund unless you find some resources somewhere else in the company. And a big part of a successful migration is to throw off those funds to fund further innovation. It's a good way to start replacing your house of cards, the rat's nest of technology that we've developed over the past 25 years, to start untangling that. A good way to do it is to extract, especially a customer-facing component of a core business application, and get it to the cloud, where it's going to be much easier to modernize it. And finally, what we hear a lot from enterprise clients is this is sometimes simply a requirement because they have merged or restructured their business or acquired another company that might be a little further or a little behind their own migration to the cloud. So it's a great way to accelerate the integration of two companies during a merger and acquisition. So all of this modernization has driven cloud adoption into hypergrowth for the past 6 years. So public cloud adoption, which you see on the right here, was 10% in 2013. So we've grown sixfold in just 6.5, 7 years. The reason I show the growth in hosted private cloud and internal private cloud as well is because customers are still investing in trying to modernize their on-prem environments as well to make them as cloudy as possible. For whatever reason, they might not want to move a particular app to the cloud day one before they start to modernize it. The good news is, and what's driven these numbers to keep pace with the adoption rates for public cloud, is that a lot of the technologies that you see as aligned with public cloud are now more and more available on-prem as places to start. So you can do some transformation on-prem using public cloud aligned hybrid platforms like from AWS, Azure, or Google. But you can also make your internal cloud environments look much more like a public cloud. So you can start getting to work modernizing in more than one place. An important thing to note too, these are just adoption rates. The reason we're seeing them slow down is we're reaching that 65 to 70% threshold of companies in the cloud. That's pretty much saturation. This is not percentage of workloads. We are still well below 20% of core business workloads that have migrated to cloud. So we are just getting started in this transformation. Another important data point that's been growing significantly for the past few years is, does your cloud strategy include migrating some existing app to a cloud environment? Where is migration in the strategy? And it's the first step in strategy for 69% of companies today. This is actually probably up to around 75% now, because this data is about a year old. And we're just now processing the new data. But migration is a fundamental element of cloud computing. And the reason I say that consistently is we're trying to make sure people understand that this is not, migration is not your older brother or older sister's lift and shift. We're not just moving applications and rehosting them in virtual machines in someone's better run infrastructure. We are using the migration opportunity to start the modernization process. It's intricately combined. So let's go a little bit deeper. Every year we ask hundreds, well, it's actually thousands of global customers what the current state of their cloud strategy is in a bunch of different aspects. And this specifically asks about part of your current cloud strategy when it comes to existing workloads. What are you doing with these applications? And you can see that anything that starts with migrate, migrating existing workloads off premises into a private cloud dedicated to us, like a specific VPN isolated private cloud, migrating existing workloads into public cloud, the top two answers, and migrating into internal private cloud. We call this the move and improve group, right? That's starting with a move, but improving on the way. You see it's much higher than at the bottom. We've got completely rewriting our existing applications to be native for a cloud environment, or even a partial rewriting of existing workloads to be native in a public or hosted private cloud environment. And that's because it's riskier. There's more of a challenge to do that. It costs more, and you need to get a lot more innovation funding to do a rebuild. And you see that actually building net new is higher than improving existing apps sort of with the traditional transform on-prem and then move. I think that's because the maturity of cloud platforms at this point, and especially services like AMS, are changing the calculus for companies that want to accelerate their migration strategy. There are much more valuable ways to migrate workloads into a public cloud today. And at the end of that, you've thrown off much more CapEx cost, operational cost, and even potentially licensing costs once you start replacing components of applications with native cloud services than we've ever seen before. The other way to look at the evolution that we're seeing in large enterprises and their relationship with cloud is that core applications are really the next natural wave of applications to modernize. Most companies started along what we call the first wave of cloud adoption, very focused on web and mobile systems of engagement. That goes back to the endless talk for the last 10 years of being digitally disrupted. You're being digitally disrupted. How do you react? Well, you better have a better mobile and web app to create much better customer experiences and meet your customers in their moment of need, learn much more about them, reach them much better than your competition. Well, what did Wave 1 do? It threw off a lot of new data, a lot of new information about customers, buying preferences, what they did and didn't like, opportunities, new opportunities with to sell additional services, to have higher touch engagements with clients. And that's really what pushed the second giant wave of analytics, database, business intelligence, predictive analytics services, these systems of insight. Because if we can't do anything with that data, why are we collecting it? Well, now we're in the third wave because we've started to gain some insights from all the data we're collecting, and we have to figure out what we do with those insights. If we can't change our sales processes, our customer relations processes, our core financials and production systems, regardless of what industry we're in, to meet this new demand, we're not going to be able to continue to improve customer experience. There's only so far enterprises can go transforming the customer experience of only their web and mobile systems of engagement to differentiate at this point. How much better is one banking mobile website than another? How much better is one airline website than another? What really will start changing customer experience further and improving customer experience is if we can start transforming the core applications where we've encoded business process for the last 20 years. That means being able to deliver new and innovative services within our existing business process. And wave 4, which will be incredibly exciting when we get there, is when we can feed all of those changes to core apps back into actually changing our business process. Because really, today, core applications have evolved to the point they are because we've been codifying business process into applications for a long time. The new way that we have to think about the design of our applications moving forward is being much more customer driven, where the business process should naturally fall out of the insights that we're gathering from clients, and not be driven so much by business processes that are already in place. And again, detaching some way an application from either an aging legacy infrastructure platform or from a data center that's currently being consolidated is a great first way to simply experiment with, can we make the application itself more portable than it's been before? Then we can start that modernization activity. So 5 approaches are emerging, and then depending on who you talk to, you can hear anything from 3 to 7 different approaches to modernizing core apps. We're trying to simplify this. We see 5 common approaches and emerging. The bottom 2 are a focus on replacement of software assets. Either we replace with a full SaaS solution or we rebuild. The goal is to get rid of it. The code's just not working. We need to replace it. These are typically risky approaches and will probably be undertaken by companies for about, at max, 20 to 25% of their software portfolio, depending on how much a company's software portfolio depends on custom-built software. But especially in industries that are heavily weighted toward custom-designed software, and that balance is shifting as well as every company becomes a software company. We're seeing the ones in the light gray box re-platform with what sounds like a traditional lift and shift, being replaced by move, then modernize, and still with an active approach of modernizing in place and then moving for applications that for whatever reason we need to start getting better and modernize before we can move it. But this really, the goal is gradual replacement, and I think this is going to be the path that most enterprises are going to follow. Really, we can't take the risk of big bang replacements for a lot of existing applications. And the good news is that whether you take a move then modernize approach or a modernize then move approach to your applications, the breadth of cloud services is growing every year. So you're not going to find that you can't find a compute type or a storage type or a network type, but you're also going to find that you're not going to be able to not find the right type of database you want to use or IoT platform, or extend with a modern container-based development platform, or even several different developer experiences. Because this is really the impact that public cloud is having. The breadth of services is like no other, and like none that we can offer in an on-premises data center at this point. So the general trend is shifting heavily toward move then modernize. In addition, every enterprise of any size that we talk to at Forrester has actually 3 primary strategies going on at once. 2 of them are heavily dependent on migration and modernization. Everyone needs to build new cloud native apps faster. So how do we build that once and run anywhere? Public cloud platforms are almost, I think it's about 75 to 80% at this point, the target platform for all net new cloud native apps. The companies still need to migrate infrastructure. We don't want to leave on the table the benefits we can get for optimizing infrastructure operations through what could be considered a simple lift and shift of infrastructure. That is how people are freeing innovation funds to power the third here, which is modernizing existing legacy apps. The more that you can align these 3 strategies together, and as Mike said, learn from each 3 of these strategies, right? Your developers who are building net new cloud native apps are learning the services that you will then use down the road to modernize your existing legacy apps. When you migrate infrastructure, you will learn how to disconnect it from traditional monitoring and operations tools and monitor natively in the cloud and become much more automated. And so the learnings for all three tie into each other, and Mike's flywheel analogy applies here as well. This really is a virtuous cycle where a little bit of progress in each dimension helps your progress in the others. So that all sounds wonderful, but something's holding us back from doing it. The 5 most common queries that Forrester gets around migration, especially tied to core app modernization, is that it's difficult for companies to establish security and compliance policies in the cloud. It's not that companies believe anymore the cloud is not as secure or more secure than their data center environments. It's that they just don't have the skills to convince security teams or train security teams to understand how they can replicate their on-prem security processes in the public cloud. The second really is a lack of skills. You can't hire your way out of this problem right now. It's very difficult to find cloud experts, and especially cloud migration experts, to do this on your own. And since the first step is migration, those are the first experts we think you should be looking for. There's also a lot of inexperience with cloud cost modeling and cloud cost optimization. It's a new muscle that enterprises have to learn. It's different than managing capacity and costs on-prem. And finding lack of funding. Just to fund initial cloud migration services and tools, the more that you can offload to a service provider, the easier you're going to be able to unload funds for innovation down the road. And finally, resistance from existing operations teams that are unsure how to manage cloud. The only way to overcome that resistance is to include them in the process and train them in new ways to manage infrastructure in the cloud. It's a great learning opportunity for your existing staff. And with that, we dug a lot more deeper into the economics around this. I'd like to hand it off to my colleague, Julia.
Thanks, Dave. I'm so glad you talked about it, because it will tie in perfectly into what we heard from the clients who we interviewed for the TEI. But everyone on the webinar can be maybe asking yourself at this point, what is a TEI? And TEI stands for the total economic impact. We built the TEI methodology about 20 years ago because Forrester found that over 90% IT decision makers in North America see value in a business case. And so the question became, what was the effective business case? Early on, case studies focused really on the total cost of ownership, including IT costs and IT savings. And going one step further, the ROI analysis took into account tangible business benefits such as efficiency and incremental revenue. Today, when we look at the TEI case study, we actually include ROI, but also take into account risk and uncertainty around a technology investment. We also evaluate long-term outcomes such as scalability and flexibility. Within the TEI framework, we look at the benefits such as improvements to productivity or efficiency or cost avoidance. We will also look at the costs, and that could be implementation, ongoing support, or training. We also consider flexibility. Now that you have access to a certain technology, what new long-term paths are opening to you, and what impact they may bring to your business. And as a final step, we'll look at the risk to make sure that we account for variations in benefits and the costs that could happen within any technology investment. All of these considerations come together for the total economic impact analysis. To build a TEI case study, we take a multi-step approach. We start with a series of conversations, in this case with AWS and Forrester experts, to lay the foundations for the further discussions with the customers. We then interviewed 6 customers who use AWS Managed Services to understand what their experience was before and after they made the decision to partner with AMS. And based on the interviews, we built a financial model that I will share with you in the course of this presentation. Before we dive into the interesting stuff, let's look at the fine print for a minute here. The study is commissioned by AWS, and AWS provided the names of the organization that Forrester needs to interview. But beyond the introduction, AWS was not involved in the interviews, and the interviews were confidential between Forrester and the companies we interviewed. AWS also reviewed the Forrester findings, but Forrester maintains editorial control over the study. And one last thing I want you to remember while you're listening to the outcomes of the study. The analysis that you're about to see provides mainly a framework for evaluating the outcome of an investment. And Forrester strongly advises that you use your own estimates within this framework to determine whether this will be the outcome that you're looking for in your engagement with AMS. And now that we've talked about all the details before we set up the stage, let's look at the high-level findings here. This is the big takeaway, the financial outcome of a 3-year partnership with AWS Managed Services for an organization. The first number I want to draw your attention to is here in the bottom. It's the net present value of $7.7 million. The NPV represents the benefits over the costs over a 3-year period. And that includes a 10% discount to account for the fact that money is worth more today than it is next year or the year after. The NPV of 7.7 million resulted in 243% return on investment. For those who are less familiar with ROI, any positive number would mean that you made money from this investment. In this case, with the ROI of nearly 250%, you can say that the organization received the benefits of nearly 2.5 times the size of the investment that they made over the course of 3 years. And that's an outstanding finding. The 10.8 million number that you see on the slide is the total sum of the benefits that the company accrued in its benefits from working with AMS. And we'll dive deeper into how we arrived at all of these findings and numbers as we go through. So for this study, Forrester interviewed 6 AWS customers. As we spoke to them, we focused on the value that they saw from working with AMS during their data center exit and cloud migration, and also beyond to the ongoing operational support. As you can see, we spoke with the companies from different industries. We have software, we have energy, manufacturing, media, and financial services. And despite the variety in the industries and business models, all of them had unique, obviously, cloud needs. Each of these organizations came from a different place, but they all had a lot of similarities. So especially, we saw a lot of similarities when it came to the challenges. And this is very similar what Dave was speaking about, what he hears from the clients that come to Forrester. First and foremost, these organizations didn't have the skilled resources who could manage migration and the new cloud infrastructure operations. For many years, the organization's infrastructure team focused on running data centers and didn't have the expertise that was needed to drive the new business initiative of migrating to the cloud or operating cloud infrastructure. Secondly, all companies we spoke to had needed a migration to happen really quickly. For example, several of them had a hard deadline for their data center exit. And if they missed the deadline, they would have incurred a year's worth of data center management fees. And even more importantly, they would have held up the business transformation initiative that was top of mind for their executive teams. And last but not least, these companies were under pressure to select the right partners. They felt that they were taking a big step moving to the cloud already, and that put a lot of pressure on them. But finding the right partner or partners who could help them with the migration and then operations added even more stress to the IT and infrastructure teams, and they were keen to alleviate that stress. Perhaps not surprisingly, based on the challenges which we discussed, these companies had certain criteria when they looked for a partner. They wanted to work with someone who could complete the migration with greater efficiency, ideally requiring less time and fewer internal resources than the company had on its own or could train in the near future. And also, they wanted to do it with less risk. They wanted to minimize the impact to the business and to the infrastructure teams. What's important is that these companies who we interviewed were able to find what they were looking for as they partnered with AWS Managed Services. Well, first of all, working with AMS allowed them to achieve fully optimized cloud operations. The AMS teams set up cloud operations to follow AWS best practices. Companies benefited from the technical and process expertise that came from AWS, which also resulted in the creation of cloud infrastructure that was optimized for efficiency and ready to support their growth. Also, working with AMS delivered a major uplift to the organization's security and reduced the chance of a major security breach. Companies now had the optimal landing zone configuration, they had compliance governance structures in place, and also they were using the 24/7 monitoring and response that AMS delivered to them. AMS also enabled their clients to complete migration in time to meet their deadlines. Without the expertise, proprietary tools, and best practices that AMS brought to the table, the migration would have taken much longer to complete. Getting to the operational stage in less time allowed companies to take advantage of the cloud much sooner, and that's what they were looking for. And what companies called out more than once was that AWS Managed Services took over their infrastructure operations as a very reliable and, what's more important, proactive partner. They didn't get to see it from their previous vendors that they worked with management, other services that they have. And this was critical for their businesses because it allowed them to keep their engineering talent focused on their core work to drive innovation and not to worry about infrastructure provisioning or compliance management or anything else that came with the operations. One of the main values that the TI study has to offer is that it lets true customer voices come through. And I want to share only this one quote with you now, but I strongly encourage you to take a look at the study for this one and any others that may be just as compelling as this one. We looked at several managed service providers, but we had to ask ourselves, in what scope do we bring them in? Do we bring them in to run, to build the cloud infrastructure landing zone? Do you bring them in for the migration? Do you bring them in for cloud operations? And AMS offered all three of those. That was an overpowering sentiment from the customers that we interviewed. For the purposes of this study, Forrester aggregated all the information that we heard from the AMS clients, and we created a composite organization that is representative of what we heard in the interviews. The case study and the rest of what you will hear today will focus on the benefits that are accrued by the composite organization. So let me describe what this company is for you. This is a $1 billion global B2C enterprise with 10,000 employees, and it's serving 6 million customers. The organization needs to migrate its 5,000 servers on an aggressive timeline. And as a part of this project, the composite organization had to build landing zones, ensure strong governance, security, and compliance guardrails, also manage the actual migration process, and establish proper operating practices post-migration. And that would include monitoring, alerting, and incident response. Originally, the organization considered leading the efforts with internal resources, but then ultimately it chose to rely on AMS in everything from roadmap development and planning to execution and ongoing operations. In the study, you'll see a more detailed description of the composite and their project specification, but I think for the purposes of our discussion today, this should suffice. Now that you know what the composite looks like and what challenges it faced, how it arrived at the decision to partner with AMS, let's look at the financial outcomes of that decision. As you can see on the slide, the total benefits amounted to $10.8 million. The highest one of $3.2 million came from the composite company not needing to hire new cloud resources. Running the project in-house was the alternative to AMS-led cloud migration and management. And this would have required hiring the equivalent of 10 full-time resources with the cloud expertise and then keeping them on staff to run cloud operations post-migration. Leveraging AMS to prepare for the migration and to take over operations saved hundreds of hours of expensive resource time. The second benefit of $2.3 million resulted from accelerated migration to the cloud. For the composite, exiting its data center resulted in a monthly cost savings of $250,000 because the organization completed the migration a year faster because it used AMS than it would have done with its in-house team. It gained 12 months worth of those savings that could then be applied to innovation, as Dave was talking about. The third benefit that the organization was able to realize came from better use of the resources that were already employed. AMS brought in operational excellence, expertise, experience, and best practices that allowed the composite company to achieve higher resource efficiency gains than what it would have achieved on its own. The company got more value out of every man-hour spent, which accounted for nearly $900,000 over the course of 3 years. If our composite were to run this project on their own, creating or buying its own infrastructure management tools, such as patch, update, or backup solutions, would have increased their infrastructure costs by $2.9 million. AMS provided all necessary management tools, which allowed the composite to avoid all these fees that they would have paid if they led the cloud operations on their own. Also, working with AMS delivered a major uplift to the organization's overall security posture, and it reduced the chance of a major security breach, which resulted in $1 million. That could have included potential damage from the brand reputation, stock price changes, and cost remediation efforts. And finally, with AMS running cloud operations, the organization saw higher uptime for their e-commerce channels because the patching compliance was better, the number of major security breach incidents went down, and incident response was also faster. Higher uptime resulted in incremental revenue of $500,000 nearly, and the organization would have not been able to recognize this revenue if they ran the cloud operations on their own. In addition to the benefits that we were able to put a number to, customers talked about the benefits to working with AMS that they couldn't really quantify, but that doesn't mean that these were less significant. First of all, working with AMS enabled companies to focus on innovation. Since AMS handled migration planning, execution, ongoing operations, companies' internal engineering resources were able to stay focused on their core business functions and on their technology projects. AMS also enforced consistency and standardization throughout the migration process and beyond, which ensured that the organizations followed AWS best practices and enabled fast project timelines. AMS also advised the organizations on ways to optimize infrastructure and reduce costs during and after the migration. AWS Managed Services drew on its expertise and experience, encouraging the organizations to reconsider their choice of processes and tools to drive efficiency. And finally, but that's still very important, working with AMS delivered peace of mind to these companies. The organizations received knowledgeable, consistent, and very proactive support and guidance from AMS teams and relied on them to meet key migration milestone dates and also run cloud operations smoothly and independently that they couldn't have hoped to achieve otherwise. As you can probably imagine, this doesn't come for free. The organizations paid a fee for working with AWS Managed Services. For the interviewees, the fees varied based on the type of services that AMS needed to manage, response and restoration time commitment levels, everything that was selected for the AWS account. Forrester accounted for these costs as we built the financial model, and for the composite organization, those amounted to just over $3 million over the course of 3 years. As I mentioned earlier, when we built TI case studies, we want to make sure that we account for the variability between organizations. The result of partnering with AMS will certainly vary for each listener. Your company may be under more or less pressure to migrate quickly, may have different level of knowledge and resources available within your organization. And also the size and the complexity of the migration will differ, as well as the number of critical operations and the needs for particular response time. So the cost that you see and the timelines that you see may be not exactly what the composite experienced. We take these risks into account as we built our financial analysis. And to account for that, we bring the benefits down by 5, 10, or 15%, depending on the level of risk. We also build in the risk into the costs, making them higher to account for uncertainty. And that means that you should feel pretty good about the numbers that you are seeing because they are fairly conservative since the risk is already considered. And I also need to mention some new business opportunities that were enabled for the companies that we interviewed because of AMS. Working with AWS Managed Services guarantees preview and immediate access to new capabilities that are available through AWS, because companies are constantly looking to simplify their environments, to optimize costs, strengthen security, and AMS is there to make this happen. Internal engineers working side by side with AMS resources throughout the migration and beyond are also an additional resource for the company. They've learned why AMS made certain decisions, how they operate the environment post-migration, and that knowledge stays with them and could be leveraged in the future independently as well. So last look at the financial summary now that you've heard all the details here. The dark green columns represent the benefits and the light ones show the costs. The yellow line is showing cumulative net benefits. So the total net present value reaches $7.7 million in a 3-year period, and the ROI amounts to 243% in those 3 years, which is an excellent outcome. And as I mentioned, this already accounts for the risk and is fairly conservative. With this last look at the findings, I want to conclude the brief summary of the TEI study. The full version definitely has more examples from the companies that we interviewed, more quotes, more stories that they've shared, and could be very helpful in providing some of the context and background for you. But this is enough of me talking for today, and I want to pass it back to Mike for any wrap up and final comments.
Sure, Julia, thanks so much for the detail. Really, really insightful and so exciting as I work with so many customers on AMS adoption to really see the financial impact that they're able to enjoy. And I'd love to see if the audience has questions on some of the nuance of those factors and maybe why the customer found each of those valuable. And then certainly thanks again to Dave for Forrester's view of the strategy customers ought to follow as they think about these migrations, not only hey, just lift and shift. I like that. You know, this is not the old way of lifting and shifting, moving from one data center to the next. So long as you're moving house, an amazing opportunity to consider easy to implement, you know, replatforming capabilities such as moving to managed relational database services, just an easy way, you know, if you have the right licensing architecture for it and so on, where you can offload that undifferentiated operational burden to other folks. And so from the AMS perspective and larger than that, the AWS perspective, we've got a large suite of customer enablement services that can help you migrate and build faster in the cloud. We've got professional services to help you with project-based initiatives from planning your migration to digital innovation and unlocking some of those business ideas that can be quickly and easily built on cloud with low operational burden. Again, you can look to AMS both for traditional operations, those on compute, patching, backup, and so on, as well as managing secure and compliant landing zones where you can be hosting those innovation applications if the operating model is right for your business. We've got extensive training and certification resources ranging from on-site instructor-led training to free on-demand training that you can find on the training and certification website. We've also got AWS IQ, where you can retain experienced professionals to do certified third-party works that you may implement. So this could be architectures, implementations of architectures, run books, rules to map to your compliance framework that can be run in cloud, giving you real-time or daily compliance reports, just as an example. And of course, we have AWS support, cloud expertise, where you can reach in, get your questions answered. If you have AMS, we can white glove you into support. If you don't use AMS, or for those innovation accounts not running on AMS, you can get a technical account manager that can be assisting you in realizing your cloud goals. And then of course, we have an extensive partner network where you can reach out to our partner teams and they can provide all manner of services to you, including application operation should you require, and really just partner with you to help achieve your goals that we believe cloud can unlock. So with that, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today and listen to how we're thinking this study can help you analyze your own operational benefit and how AWS Managed Services might be able to help you achieve your cloud operations goals. I think the most exciting part is you can click the link. Some of these material are quite detailed and in-depth. I think Julia did a great job of covering them, but if you'd like to read them in detail or go back and revisit those graphs and think about how you might be able to populate those graphs with your own data, just click the link you see right there and you can download the study in detail. And if you'd like to learn about AWS Managed Services, you've got the link there as well. And so now we have an opportunity to do some Q&A.